Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in the world of Torah, which we inherit and which we create as well. So we are in our concluding portion in the book of Genesis. This is Parshat Vayechi. You can find it beginning with chapter 47, verse 28. We will read through our English translation. I'll provide a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our collective conversation. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, together we can recite our blessing for the opportunity of this moment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher ishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for the opportunity of immersing ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Book of Genesis, chapter 47, verse 28. Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, so that the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years. And when the time approached for Israel to die, he summoned his son Joseph and said to him, "Do me this favor. Place your hand under my thigh as a pledge of your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, take me up from Egypt and bury me in their burial place." He replied, "I will do as you have spoken." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed. Richard, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 28?
Yes, thank you. Sometime afterward, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to see you," Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me and said to me, 'I will make you fertile and numerous, making of you a community of peoples, and I will give this land to your offspring to come for an everlasting possession.' Now, your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine no less than Reuben and Simeon. But progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They shall be recorded instead of their brothers in their inheritance. I do this because when I was returning from Adam, Rachel died, to my sorrow, while I was journeying in the land of Canaan, and still some distance short of Ephrath. And I buried her there on the road to Ephrath, now Bethlehem."
Thank you. And Dave, would you like to read beginning at verse 8?
Noticing Joseph's sons, Israel asks, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons whom God has given me here. Bring them up to me." And he said, "That I might bless them." Now Israel's eyes were dim with age, he could not see. So Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see you again, and here God has let me see your children as well." Joseph then removed them from his knees and bowed low with his face to the ground. Joseph took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, thus crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, saying, "The God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from the day of my birth, the angels who redeemed me from all harm, bless the lads, in them may my name be recalled, and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth."
Thank you so much, Dave. June, would you like to read starting with verse 17?
Thank you, Rabbi. And when Joseph saw that his father was laying his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head onto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Howbeit his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, By thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he said, Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die, but God will be with you, and bring you back unto the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow.
Thank you so much. And now we're starting with chapter 49. Paul, would you like to begin reading there?
Yes, Rabbi. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, Assemble yourselves, and I will tell you what will befall you in the end of days. Gather yourselves and listen, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, and my initial vigor, foremost in rank and foremost in power. Water-like impetuosity. You cannot be foremost because you mounted your father's bed, then you desecrated him, who ascended my couch. Simon and Levi are comrades. Their weaponry is a stolen craft. Into their conspiracy, may my soul not enter. With their congregation, do not join. O my honor, for in their rage they murdered people, and at their whim they hamstrung an ox. Accursed is their rage, for its intense, and their wrath for its harsh. I will separate them within Jacob, and I will disperse them in Israel. Judah, you, your brothers, shall acknowledge. Your hand will be at your enemy's nape. Your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. A lion cub is Judah. From the prey, my son, you've elevated yourself. He crouches, lies down like a lion, and like the awesome lion, who dares rouse them. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a scholar from among his descendants until Shiloh arrives. And his will be an assembly of nations. He will tie his donkey to the vine branch his donkey's foal. He will launder his garments in wine and his robe in the blood of grapes, red-eyed from wine and white-toothed from milk.
Thank you so much, Paul. Jim and Peggy, would you like to read beginning at verse 13?
Thank you, Rabbi. Zebulun shall dwell by the seashore. He shall be a haven for ships, and his flank shall nest on Sidon. Issachar is a strong-boned ass, crouching among the sheepfolds. When he saw how good was security and how pleasant was the country, he bent his shoulder to the burden and became a toiling serf. Dan shall govern his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the road, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider is thrown backward. I wait for your deliverance, O Adonai. God shall be raided by raiders, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's bread shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a hind yet loose, which yields lovely fawns. Joseph is a wild ass by a spring, wild colts on a hillside.
Archers bitterly assailed him. They shot at him and harried him, yet his bow stayed taut. and his arms were made firm by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. There the shepherd, the rock of Israel, the God of your father who helps you, and Shaddai, who blesses you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that couches below, blessings of the breast and womb. The blessings of your father surpass the blessings of my ancestors. To the utmost bounds of the eternal hills, may they rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the elect of his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he consumes the foe, and in the evening he divides the spoil.
Thank you so much, both of you. And let me invite David and Susan, if you'd like to read beginning at verse 28.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. These are the tribes of Israel, 12 in all, and this is what their father spoke to them, blessing them. Each according to his blessing, he blessed them. And he charged them and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my kinfolk. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron, in the land, the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which faces Mamre, in the land of Canaan. The field that Abraham bought from Ephron, the Hittite, as a burial holding. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried Leah, the field and the cave within it, bought from the Hittites. And Jacob finished charging his sons, and he gathered his feet up into the bed, and he breathed his last and was gathered to his kinfolk.
And Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. And the physicians embalmed Israel, and they spent 40 days on him, because that is the number of days they spent on the embalming. And Egypt mourned him 70 days. And his mourning days passed, and Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's house, saying, if I found favor in your eyes, speak in Pharaoh's ears, saying, my father had me swear, saying, here I'm dying in my tomb, which I dug for me in the land of Canaan. You shall bury me there. And now let me go back up so that I may bury my father and come back. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father as he had you swear.
Thank you so much, both of you. And let me invite Jay. Would you like to read starting at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the officials of Pharaoh, the senior members of his court, and all of Egypt's dignitaries, together with all of Joseph's household, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the region of Goshen. Chariots too, and horsemen went up with him. It was a very large troop. When they came to Gorim Hatad, which is beyond the Jordan, they held there a very great and solemn lamentation, and he observed a mourning period of 7 days for his father. And when the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning at Gorim Hatad, they said, this is a solemn mourning on the part of the Egyptians. That is why it was named Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had instructed them. His sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, the field near Mamre, which Abraham had bought for a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father.
Thank you, Jay. Justin, would you like to read starting at verse 15?
Yes, Rabbi. Now Joseph's brothers saw that their father had died, and they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and return us all the evil that we did him. So they commanded messengers to go to Joseph and say, your father commanded us before his death, saying, so shall you say to Joseph, Please forgive now your brothers' transgression and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also went and fell before him, and they said, "Behold, we are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid, for am I instead of God? Indeed, you intended evil against me, but God designed it for good, in order to bring about what is at present to keep a great populace alive. So now do not fear, I will sustain you and your small children." And he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw children of a third generation born to Ephraim. Also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm going to die. God will surely remember you and take you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." And Joseph adjured the children of Israel, saying, "God will surely remember you, and you shall take up my bones out of you." And Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him, and he was placed into a coffin in Egypt.
Thank you all very much. Beautiful reading. And we conclude the book of Genesis. And as we conclude a book of Torah, we have a special blessing that we recite, which is translated as be strong, and we shall be strengthened. If you'd like to unmute, and together we can recite that in the Hebrew. Chazak, Chazak, Benit. Thank you very much, everyone. Let me share with you a little bit of a focused study, and then we'll open it up for our collective conversation. If you have a study sheet, I invite you to take it out. Our entry point for this week's Torah study session is a painting by Arshil Gorky entitled "The Limit." And I'd like to begin by looking at something that Gorky said about this particular painting, which often is a bit of text that accompanies the painting whenever it is on exhibit. And that's in number 1 of your study sheet. "I have been so lonely, exasperated, and how to paint such empty space? So empty, it's the limit." I was intrigued by that, by the painting, and I'm intrigued by what Gorky said about the painting, because it's an interesting combination of terms and concepts, that of emptiness and limit. Usually when I think of emptiness, I think of there being nothing. When I think of limit, I think of something being full. This is the limit. I'm stuffed to the limit. This is the maximum amount. So to try and pair that with the notion of emptiness, to me, is rather provocative and perplexing. I don't know exactly what he means by pairing these two terms of emptiness and limit. So if we look at the painting itself, what we may see there are a number of shapes with rather vague borders, and they're rather amorphous, maybe amorphous blobs, perhaps is one way to describe them, and they appear almost as if they're floating on the canvas. And so Gorky was a bridge between two schools of art, that of surrealism, and then what followed it, that of abstract expressionism. And what surrealism was really involved with was a delving into and an exploration of the unconscious. And then abstract expressionism comes along and then moves on to something, a slightly different focus, which is that seeking to express a sense of spontaneity, of transcendence, to express something that is beyond reason, beyond the life of rational control. And Gorky kind of bridges these two movements, and perhaps we can see something of that in this painting, where in one sense we might see kind of maybe even mythic figures or mythic ideology being expressed there, but then also something that goes beyond an exploration of just the unconscious and is trying to free himself from any kind of control and just explore and expand. And so this notion of that there is an emptiness which defines the limit is kind of very, very intriguing. So what's also intriguing about this particular painting is the history of the painting. Gorky painted this in 1947. 73 years later, when he had already died, he died in 1948. So 73 years after he had painted this painting, The Limit, in 2020, it was undergoing some routine repair and conservation work. And those who were working on it noticed that sticking out from beneath this canvas was some other color, some other fabric with color. And they very delicately removed this painting, and underneath they found another painting. And this was the first time anyone was aware that below this painting called The Limit was another painting which remains untitled, but some people have referred to the second painting as Beyond the Limit. So you see some of the things, the themes that we're playing with here, which is what is emptiness, what is a limit, and what does it mean to go beyond the limit? Okay, so our painting produced by Ashil Gorky is going to help us explore some notions having to do with the tension between hiddenness and total revelation, between certainty and openness to other possibilities, between control and relaxation and the embrace of something one had not even been aware of previously. So those are some of the themes that we're going to play with as we look at this week's study portion through this bit of focus study. So if you look at number 2 on the study sheet, we have a verse from our Torah portion, which is Jacob speaking as he's lying on his deathbed, he's surrounded by his sons, and he says, I will tell you what will happen in the end of days. Rashi, the great medieval commentator, his interpretation of this is, well, Jacob wished to reveal to them the end of all exiles, but the Shekhinah departed from him and he began to say other things. So the notion, both from Rashi and from other commentators, is that on the moment of this deathbed, Jacob is going to tell them what he has seen. Remember that Jacob is a dreamer. He is a seer, and he has these visions. And so the gift that he's going to give on his deathbed to his sons, I'm going to tell you everything that's going to happen all in the world, all the way through the end of days until history comes to an end. Everything. I'm going to tell you exactly what will happen. And then it seems he doesn't. He goes into this monologue of describing each one of his sons, something about their character, their nature, something about them. But that's different than what apparently he was prepared to do, which is to tell the future of the world all the way until its very end. So the question is, what does this mean? Why does he do this? And what lesson might we take from this? So the question is whether something has prevented him. Some of the commentary describes it as if a darkness kind of came over him and he could no longer see. Rashi here describes it as a sense of that which, the force which provides a sense of vision and enlightenment just departed from him. And he lost what he had for a moment is gone and he can no longer share it. I want to suggest something different. I want to suggest that this was an act of intention on Jacob's part, that he thought he would share with them what he was gifted to be able to share, which is this vision, this dream, this insight, this revelation about all that was going to happen. And then he changes his mind. If you look at number 3, which is from a very interesting article by Andrew Craig called Closure and the Novel. In this work, Andrew Craig explores a number of novels that seek to have as their narrative the end of time, the end of days. And he explores what does it mean to try and have such a narrative that describes the end of time. And he writes this: closure is always a fiction. Even the beginning and ending of life are hotly contested issues in law, in religion, and in ethics. I think what Andrew Craig here is saying is, it is a fantasy to be able to tie a narrative up in a neat bow and to be able to describe what is an ending. In fact, the Torah portion itself, when it's written in our Torah scroll, it defies the definition of what constitutes the beginning of a Torah portion, because there is a scribal rule that says there's supposed to be a certain amount of space in between the end of one Torah portion and the beginning of another. And in this one, the way it's written in a Torah, there's no space in between. So in a sense, it is defying the rules of what constitutes an ending, a closing portion, because the portion itself is what is called closed. Okay. It's interesting to think about the book of Genesis. And if you remember, when we discussed the very opening portion, Bereshit, it defied our notion of what constituted a beginning, because a beginning should set things on a path. It should say where things started from. But when we discussed Bereshit, we realized that grammatically, it made no sense, the opening word. And it revealed, in fact, the possibility that there were a number of beginnings. And the one that we read in the black letter just happens to be one of them. So it defied our notion of what constitutes a beginning, because there were multiple beginnings. And in a sense, this is defying our sense of what constitutes a closure, an ending, which seems to be Andrew Craig's point, which is that closure is always a fiction. But let's see how some more traditional commentary deals with this notion. In number 4, we have a little story from Talmud, from Masechet Ta'anit, which those of us, those who are participating in the study of the Talmud for a period of 7 years, it's interesting that we're reading this remark now in number 4, because we just concluded a study of the Masechet Ta'anit. So here in number 4, the story. After they had finished dinner, Rabbi Yitzhak said, "This is what Rabbi Yohanan said. Our father Jacob did not die." Rabbi Nachman said, "But surely there was eulogizing and embalming and burying him. Was it for nothing that they did this?" And Rabbi Yitzhak said, "I'm interpreting a biblical verse, Dorish." So on the one hand, it's kind of playful because it doesn't really say he died. It doesn't use a Hebrew word for died. It says expired in Hebrew, whatever that might mean. And so Rabbi Yitzhak says, look, all I'm doing is just doing a little droshing here. We're going to kind of explore as we get later into this study sheet what the relationship is between droshing and not dying. If you have a study sheet, we'll turn over and we'll get a hint of it from number 5. And this is from the prophet Amos. Thus said Adonai to the house of Israel, seek me, dirshuni, which can be rendered as inquire for me, interrogate me, or perhaps as a drosh might be, weave stories through me, and you will live. The prophet Amos here is drawing a connection between the act of interpretation and the act of living. That as long as one does not settle on a final answer, even something as outrageous as reading the text that says Jacob died, and the rabbi saying, well, maybe he didn't die. Maybe something else happened to him. Look, all I'm doing is droshing here. To drosh is a way to defeat the end of things, because it is an expansion of the possibilities of what these words mean. So here's what I want to suggest about what Jacob is doing in this moment. Jacob is about to exercise his gift of seeing, and he's about to give them what some might consider the greatest gift. Tell me what the future holds. And he starts to, and then he stops. And I want to suggest he stops because he realizes to tell them how things will end, to define for them the future, is not giving them life, it's giving them death. Because it's now going to tell them, no matter what you do, this is the way it will be. And that's no way to encourage your children to go forth in life. They need to find their own way. They need to have their own challenges. They need to make their own decisions. They need to come up with their own interpretations. They need to drosh a little bit rather than to be told this is the way it's going to be. Let me share with you a bit of a poem by William Wordsworth. His poem, Intimations of Immortality. It's a very complex poem. And it is essentially a reflection on what it means to grow old and approach death. Here are verses from that poem. Not for these I raise the song of thanks and praise, but for those obstinate questionings of sense and outward things, fallings from us, vanishings, blank misgivings of a creature moving about in worlds not realized, high instincts before which our mortal nature did tremble like a guilty thing surprised. What Wordsworth is doing in this marvelous, very complex and wonderful poem is he's reflecting on the nature of time and aging. And earlier in the poem, he reflects that as a child, he could sense heaven imbuing itself with enchantment in every aspect of the natural world. And becoming an adult, he begins to lose a sense of that wonder and begins to adopt, if you will, the demands and responsibilities and routine of adult life. And so Wordsworth begins to shift into some reflections about the nature of spirituality. And he says, and it's a reflection that comes very close to what we encounter in some of Judaism, particularly its mystical tradition. Because Wordsworth writes that when we're born, that's not really our beginning. Our origins lie in something that precedes that moment of birth, something that we call God. By adulthood, Wordsworth writes in his poem, we lose that awareness. And there's a natural flow, if you will, Wordsworth suggests, to this sense of enchantment and wonder, and then a gradual forgetting about all that sense of enchantment and wonder as we become adults. Because forgetting that is an essential part of becoming an adult. It's the only way to live in this world. You can't walk around your whole life wondering and just being in awe of the world around you. You got to get a job. You have to pay the mortgage. You have to drive down the 405 without crashing into anyone. These are part of the mundane tasks of what it means to be an adult. And so there's a moment when Wordsworth becomes somewhat sad about having lost all that. And then he realizes that it's possible to rekindle within us that childlike sense of awe, although it will be very different because now we're adults and we've experienced different things. But he says it's those things which evade our grasp and understanding, which contain the real power, which connect us to our origins. So he says we carry within ourselves these trace elements of the child self, who has a sense of mystery, or at least a compelling desire to search for the forgotten, the hidden, and the uncontrolled. So now I'm going to try and bring back our three guests here, which are Achille Gorky, William Wordsworth, and our ancestor Jacob. Because it strikes me that there's this intriguing paradox that we as human beings have experienced over the centuries, which is this. The pre-modern human being had really a much less control over the world around them than we moderns do. And yet, they had a greater sense of certainty about life because they lived, for the most part, in the same community that they were born into. They remained in the same status, social status that they were born into. People did not move around very much. The person who baked your bread would probably be the person who baked the bread for your whole life. The person who fixed your clothes, the person who was the water bearer. Everyone was basically had a way of life, an occupation that they had for their whole lives. And so there was a certain sense of certainty, even though not much control over external stimulus. By contrast, the modern human being has a great deal of control relative to pre-modern over our environment. And yet, in some ways, we have a greater sense of anxiety and uncertainties than our pre-modern ancestors did. So here's some of the lessons that I think Gorky and Wordsworth and Jacob are sharing with us, which is for Gorky, suspending any kind of sense of compelling, controlling self is a key to accessing truth and beauty and the sublime. And for Wordsworth, recovering a sense of enchantment of the world is a key to having a sense of fulfillment and happiness. And Jacob's message here seems to be, we grow by living through uncertainties and making choices along the way as we move about in worlds not realized, to quote William Wordsworth. So the closure of this book of Genesis, thanks to Jacob, is really not a closure, it's an opening. And by not foreclosing for his sons what their future would be, Jacob opens up for them a world created by their choices. And with that, I would love to hear your thoughts and reflections about this week's Torah portion. If you raise your hand, I would so love to call on you.
Okay.
Yes, Paul, please.
Okay. First of all, somebody mentioned Erev Tov, and I would like to second that because the reason I tune in is I'm introduced to painting that I never would have otherwise appreciated, and then poetry, which I would never have even noticed, and then if I did, I wouldn't have read into it what I was just taught. So now comes the Erev Tov, which is just the opposite. Okay, I'm the one that always kind of looks at the very superficial on the top. And if I look at Jacob as having a flawed character, let's just they say drash, whatever the words are. Anyway, just take that for an assumption. So the first thing he did was, if I recall, Joseph was not the first son. Somebody, Reuben or whoever it was the first. So he favored that son. And then as the result of that, the son had all kinds of troubles. Okay. A lot of good things happened thereafter, but before. So now you think he would learn something from that. So then when it comes to his deathbed, what does he do? He brings Joseph back. Of course, it's the most powerful one. But then there's all these other sons. And then he selects, oh boy, two sons of Joseph, and he just ignores all the other guys. So now if I look at Joseph as a flawed figure, I can see a final mistake. The guy decides he's going to tell the story of the world on his deathbed. And configuring that maybe I have half an hour or something, but I'm going to tell the whole. So if I look at it at the very top surface, can we not include that maybe Jacob had too big an ambition for his last moments? And so, true, there is the idea that he's a seer, the way you're explaining it, and which I'll accept. But I also want to bring forward sometimes the things that when I read the story, so as you make us read the story, so I actually read it, and then things kind of occur to me. So besides the Erev Tov, there's the Erev Tough. So that's not part of the Hebrew alphabet.
Thank you that's lovely, Paul. Thank you so much. And others? I want to one comment that you made that really made me think of something I had never thought of before. So thank you very much, Paul, which is we were talking about some art movements when we were looking at the Gorky painting. We were talking about surrealism, and we were talking about abstract expressionism. So let me suggest that one of the things that Jacob does here is evocative of another modern art movement, and that is Dadaism. So Dadaism was a movement that was developed primarily in response to the First World War. Artists who were shocked by how supposedly such a rational, intellectual world could have descended into the pit of mass violence that it did. And so they created art that tried to upend our sense of reliance and dependence and comfort with reason and rationality, because all that led to was this massive destruction of tens of millions in the world. And so a classic example was a great Belgian painter, René Magritte, who painted very simply a pipe, and in French is written, ce n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. And here's what Jacob does. Joseph presents the two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and says, here they are, they're ready to be blessed. And Jacob crosses his hands. And Joseph says, rational, good executive administrator that he is, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. This is the older one, this is the younger one. And Jacob says, I know, but this is the one who's going to.
This is how we do it in my family.
Yeah, this is how we do it in my family. I'm going to upend your expectations about who should be blessed in which manner. He's trying to, and it's in these final moments, I think, Jacob is trying to tell us there's more to, you've been a great administrator. You've relied on strategy and reason and rationality and science and competence and all that. And it's as if Jacob is trying to warn him and say, that's not sufficient. He wants to upend his reliance on order, if you will. There's a certain amount of disorder that's needed in order to thrive in this world. So thank you, Paul. All right, and then others who would like to share some. Richard, yeah.
Well, it's the limit. It's space. it's too much. It's beyond what I can do. It's a limit for me. I have to do something about this. So that makes it okay for me to use the term, oh, that's the total limit. That's beyond me to deal with.
Beyond me.
But he struggles to try and put some order there, and he's obviously covering up something else underneath that thing and we'll never know about. The other painting, which is beyond the limit. But when it comes to this business about Jacob is promising to say what's going to happen in the future, my translation of the Masoretic text says, "Come together that I may tell you what is to befall you in the days to come." So I thought about that, and then when you said that, as it's written in the Torah, it comes edge to edge, it's only the prelude. And what's going to happen, and he tells them all their personalities, and they're all stunks. He's saying, this is what you're going to have to deal with, what's inside you. That's what's going to happen in the days to come. And just as you said, Rabbi, what's going to happen is going to be by virtue of the choices you make based on trying to read out some of these jealousies you have amongst you and your ability to do these things, these poor things, these bad things. And about Ephraim and Manasseh, I've been thinking that here, Isaac is the second son. Jacob is the second son. He comes out holding on to Esau's shoe, but he's forward. And there's the second son. The story is the first son gets everything in life, and none of them are the first sons. And Ephraim, becomes Israel. And he's Jacob's son, so he's Israel. He's the nation of Israel up north. And then also here in the portion, I think it's this portion that talks about Judah, the scepter will never depart from Judah. Well, the scepter did depart from Judah. He left it as a surety for Tamar, who had twins. And she had twins, and the second one, first one out was Zahar, who had a wristband put on it and then drew back in. And here comes Perez. He's the second son, but he becomes the sire of David's line. So there's all these factions and fractions of good and evil put together. And I think something about why it's something about the women in their wombs that they're making the decision about this child who's youngest and spends time in the kitchen and gets that mother love. That's the one we want to lead us, not just the warrior. And look at poor Benjamin, who had no mothering. Well, but where is he landed? He landed in Mount Moriah, where the temple is. And so these juxtapositions are always going to be there within us. And I think that's what Jacob is telling us, that this is what is befalling you now. And we know in Genesis 29:3, after he came down from the ladder, he picked up his feet and continued his journey. And what happens in this portion? He picks up his feet and puts them in the bed and goes on another journey. Until the end of days, they're not going to end, because we're not at an ending, we're just at a beginning. See, Exodus is right here in the next letter.
So here, this is great. Thank you, Richard. So first of all, what you got me to thinking is that all of Torah, and this story in particular, seems to be trying to teach us a lesson that to rely on predictability, certainty, something as basic as primogeniture, the first son is going to be the one who inherits everything. I mean, you named a number of sons who were second, and of course the next one that we're going to meet is Moses, because Aaron was older than Moses. And the Torah itself is constantly trying to remind us of this by saying, just go back to the beginning of this whole story. Bereshit. I didn't start with the letter Aleph, I started with the letter Bet. And as if that itself is trying to set us up as the first lesson about don't think you understand and can predict how everything is going to happen. And because that's no way to be a human being exercising free will. That's the way to be a slave. Okay. And this is a book about anti-slavery. This is a book about free choice. This is a book about liberation. This is a book about the power of the human initiative to make a difference in the world. Okay. So the other thing I want to bring in at this point is our artist, Arshil Gorky himself, in a sense, is modeling, his life was a model of what we're talking about, because that wasn't his name. That's not the name he was born with. I may mispronounce it, but he was born with the name Bastanak Manuag Adoyan. He was born in Armenia in 1904, and his father fled so that he wouldn't be drafted into the army in 1908, came to the United States, leaving his family behind. And then in 1915, when Gorky was 11, he escaped the Armenian genocide with his mother and sisters. His mother dies of starvation in the aftermath, and the children arrive in the United States in 1920, and they're reunited with their father, but Gorky and his father are never close, and he adopts a different name. So there is, and in fact, sometimes in his life, he even hides the fact that he's Armenian and presents himself as some kind of royalty from the country of Georgia. So underneath the surface of this artist named Arshil Gorky is a whole nother story and another identity. So here, so in that way, his life as well as his paintings are trying to tell us, don't take for granted what you see on this earth.
So this is the firstborn of these paintings. The secondborn is hiding underneath.
Oh, that's very nice. Anna just said, yeah, if you didn't hear, she says, so what we're looking at in our page, the limit, has underneath it the firstborn, the untitled.
Or the secondborn. This is the firstborn is right here.
No, this is the second one because it was.
Oh, it's underneath?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, this is the one that was on top, the one he painted later.
Okay.
And this is the one that we become aware of, but there's another painting underneath.
So I just want to say that it occurred to me when Richard was talking about, when you just say literally first and secondborn, the first guy out we call the firstborn, the first baby out. But the second baby is the one who has the longest time in. Now, is it better to be in or out? You know,
In the womb.
Yes. So we always think it's the advantage to be, we think of it as the advantage to be born first, but perhaps it's not a disadvantage to remain second.
Thank you. Let me call on Susan or David. You have your hand up there.
Yeah. I love what Rashi said about the Shekinah departed from him. It reminds me that so often I have dreams and they're so vivid, and I go to remember them and they disappear, they dissipate. And I might remember pieces of them even at a later date, but I don't get to hang on to them. And so that's what this reminds me of, is that Jacob had these dreams, and then when the Shekinah departed, he wasn't able to impart them to his children, because maybe it's better that we don't know what those things are that we dream. And the other thing about moving is I've always loved to move. I know people think it's dumb, just ridiculous. There's a lot of work involved in moving, but each move is a new beginning. And so for that reason, I've always enjoyed moving. It's like you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know what the future holds. It's not same old, same old. It's not living in the same house and knowing exactly where everything is and knowing who your friends are. It's all up in the air.
Beautiful. That's beautiful, Susan. And I hope you don't have to move too soon.
So I love Paul
Okay.
said, I love what Paul said, which I consider equal level with Rashi. Paul said that Jacob got there and he had the vision of the whole future time. And he looked up and went, oh, that's a mistake. I barely have enough left in me to tell these sons of mine, all the mistakes they made and how I'm going to slap them around. Maybe next time around, I'll be able to share the whole thing.
So here is, go ahead, Margot, you wanted to say something.
There is a man, and I don't know his name, and he's fairly famous, that talks about birth order and the attributes of the firstborn, the secondborn, the thirdborn. In fact, when I heard him speak, one of the illustrations that he gave is he was in a strange city giving a talk. He got ill, needed surgery, met the surgeon who he had never met, and asked the surgeon what was his birth order, and whatever it was, he said, I don't recall what the birth order was of the surgeon, but he said, once I heard his birth order, I felt perfectly comfortable letting him operate on me. And he's quite famous. He goes around the world talking about birth order and attributes.
Thank you, Margot. That's a fascinating story. And Anna, did you have something more you want to share?
Yeah, from out in left field. The first story we get in the Bible is the first words, the first person, the first being that says this is what's going to come is God saying, Yehi or, let there be light. Now, what do you think God knew when God says, let there be light? God would know everything, but God chose just these little words, Yehi or. It's very tiny. So maybe, Joseph and Jacob was just getting a little off track with so many words. Maybe the Shekinah also wanted more to limit the words so it would be more authentic, like the first story in the first creation. What's going to come? There will be light, there will be day, there will be night, there will be this and that. We're looking at it one way, but you could also switch that over.
That's very nice.
Too many words.
Thank you.
Well, there'll be the infrared telescope just got launched, and so we'll have the idea of light and when it all began.
Yeah, they say they can go back to 14 billion years or something.
Wow.
Like that. Yeah. So let me kind of bring this not to a closure, but to a new beginning by returning us to William Wordsworth's poem. Not for these I raise the song of thanks and praise, but for those obstinate questionings, sense and outward things, fallings from us, vanishings, blank misgivings of a creature moving about in worlds not realized. So what he seems to be saying there is, it's not the things that I know, it's not the certainties in life that have brought me a sense of wisdom. It's the things that I don't know. It's the questioning of sense and outward things. That is what gives me a sense of life. So here we are, we have completed the book of Genesis. It begins with a story that involves the first human beings, in which the lesson seems to be life is not about lying around in the garden, doing nothing, and receiving the fruits as if they will always be there. Life is about assuming responsibility for the creation that we have inherited. It requires human initiative. It requires questioning. It requires making choices. And it requires labor. And it requires giving birth. That's the first story really about human beings, that life is about making decisions and taking responsibility. The last story, the one that we just read in the book of Genesis, seems to have a similar message, which is you can't assume the future is going to be the way that you've been told it's going to be. It's going to be the way you make it. It is magnificent to think about this piece of literature written over 2,000 years ago, in which the main message is that about the imperative initiative of human beings in making the world a different and better place. It's not about passively receiving what has come before us. And that is from a tradition that values tradition. And so it is a fascinating thing to think about this wonderful interplay between interruption and tradition, between continuity and making breaks. It is one of the most, for me, profound pieces of literature, profound works of wisdom that I've ever encountered. And with you, I've seen so much more. So thank you all very much. God bless you all. I look forward to our being together again soon. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.